first. Okay, all good. I'll take your word for it. There we go.
So our next presenter is Martin Dunn.
Thank you.
Okay, sound check. Anyone? Yep, okay. All right, so I'm aware that I'm presenter number 17 today, so I'm going to ask you to do a little traditional salute here from the culture of Deadly Earnest, which is everyone plays a fist like this. Raise your fist! Right, everyone shout, boo! 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 Again, boo! Boo! Let's hear it, boo! Boo! Right, we are talking about a villain here, so let's get on with it. Okay, so my name is Martin Dunn. I'm presenting my Master of Arts on Deadly Earnest, who was a horror host who introduced late-night horror films on Australian television between 1959 and 1978. Why would anyone do that? I've spent 20 years doing field research on this. It's all because of dead television. So there's going to be some Doctor Who content. Sorry if that's going to trigger anyone. So everyone finds out about the concept of dead television at different times. For me, it was 1983 Radio Times Doctor Who special for the 20th anniversary. This box here. This is a list of missing episodes of Doctor Who. They've actually found most of those now, mainly through crowdsourcing them. Awesome, awesome work. So pleased about that. But other people don't realise this, including industry professionals. So Stuart Littlemore was a 35-year veteran of the ABC, mainly known, that's how, because he used to present a show called Media Watch on ABC. He went back to write his autobiography. He found they hadn't kept any of his work. None of it. He had to make it all up when he wrote his autobiography. So he's an industry professional, I'm not. We have to find out through things like this. There you go, thus the allure of dead television. So the first job of the historian is ignorance, according to Lytton Strachey. Thank you so much, Lytton. You've actually done so much more work for me there, saying what the problem is and how we're going to get around with it. So let's have a word about methodology here. So the first thing about methodology is you have to just simply define what you're doing with your theory. So mine is like literally narrative research. Narrative research could mean absolutely anything to any people. So I've got to put an entire chapter into my thesis just saying what narrative research is and defining my terms. I also go into a bit into phenomenology, which comes irrelevant as we go along. Also philosophy of history and philosophy of fiction. So on we go. Okay, so these are some progenitor television hosts. They've all got horrible dark secrets behind them, which I've found as I've gone through the piece. So first over here, Television Ghost, 1931 mechanical television experimental TV station by CBS, W2XAB in the New York area. I found through CBS that they don't actually hold, not just recordings of it, they don't actually hold any of the documentation there. They held it all as recently as 1986. Apparently they can't find it today. What can I say? Okay, at the top we have Frank Gallup. He was a radio host who transitioned over to television and presented horror films in the late night slot. His career was actually ended by a gossip columnist named Walter Winchell because he just didn't get on with him very well. So, not very nice. Here we have Vampira. Vampira is the iconic one who actually gets the whole ironic take on horror hosting down first. Her career only lasts about a year, but everyone else that's done it since her, since 1955, has kind of done it in her mould, which is making fun of the horror films. So what I found with her is that literally every book that's been written on her has got her schedule wrong. By simply going back and actually bothering to read the LA Times, I found we've actually got everything wrong about her in the first place. The schedule is totally different to what everyone said all along. So 2 years later, we have a huge amount of horror films presented on television by Screen Gems, which was the television arm of Columbia Pictures. So they produced this press book called Shock that tells you basically how to present horror films on TV. Everyone's told me this is where the whole concept of a horror host comes from. You read this, it'll have publicity stunts and it'll explain you have a horror host to present your TV horror movies and it all works. And as I've actually read it, it's not there. The horror host thing just happened independently of all the publicity. It's almost as if they want to exist and they're kind of making themselves come into existence in the first place. I didn't know that. Okay, so here we go. So this is going to be a truncated version of my chapter on Deadly Earnest here. So Deadly Earnest was the communal name of a horror host who used by 6 commercial Australian television stations to present horror films from 1959 to 1978. The first one was portrayed by Roland Barnes on TVW7 Perth in 1959. but there's not very documentation about that. So the following four are better recorded, and they're employed by the O10 network starting in 1966. And there's a whole second wave of these horror hosts. Okay, so the important thing about that is the entire genre of horror was banned in Australia for 20 years, from 1948 to 1970. So what's that all about? So after the war, there was a whole backlog of horror films that got imported into Australia, and there was one double matinee of Son of Dracula and Ghost of Frankenstein, which was attended by juveniles. So the chief censor, one John Alexander, declared that they were simply going to ban any more films of that genre from entering the country. And he simply had the confidence of the Minister of Customs. Subsequent ministers also agreed with him, and that's what the situation was until about 1970, when a guy named Don Chipp became the Minister for Customs. He didn't agree with that policy and essentially let all the horror films in. So there was like a 20-year backlog of horror films that suddenly entered the country. So the concept is that horror hosts also sanitise the films as well as actually making them into an actual identifiable discrete package of something. So as for Barnes here, what happened is he comes along just as television starts in Australia. There's a contingent from that Perth television station that go off to the US. They come back with a big horde of these horror films, and they've also seen how this horror host thing is going off in the US. So they simply make a request of their programs department, can you find someone to actually play one of these horror hosts on television? So they come up with this guy, Roland. Roland's a naval chef by profession. He dabbles in a bit of amateur theatrics. He's only in Australia for a couple of years. He's got a Seaman's ticket. He gets given the thing of hosting all these general sort of films. They're not even really horror films. They're really just sort of B films and so forth that Channel 7's got cheap. And when he's had it up to here, he literally just jumps on the first ship, uses his Seaman's ticket and goes back to the UK, relives the rest of his life. So no one even knew about this character until I started doing this research, because he's not well known outside WA. So all a bit of a mystery. So what happens then, harking back to that band of horror, Channel Zero Melbourne decides to play King Kong. In between the week between them advertising it and actually going to go to air, the Department of Customs withdraws its rating. So everything in the country was rated G, A or AO. The actual mechanism of banning is not to have a rating at all. They had a crisis meeting and they withdrew the rating for King Kong. King Kong became banned overnight and stayed banned until 1973 after John Chipp got in and they reversed this whole banning sort of thing. So that was in 1965. So pretty much a year after that, we get the first of our next line of horror hosts. So this is a fella named Ian Bannerman, who worked for TEN 10 in Sydney. So he was actually a car salesman by profession, but he also had a bit of a line in mimicry. So he came to Australia to sell cars, and instead he got a job with this new startup media company, Channel 10. All the zeros and tens started around 65, 66. So he walks in there and says, I can sell cars, I can sell anything. And they say, we want you to sell this big package of films that we've got. So he decides, I'll use the idea of being a horror host and do it myself. So strangely enough, not all these films are actually horror films, but they actually decide to badge them as horror films despite the fact that the genre is still banned. It works for them. So it works stunningly well. So as we go on, this is a later picture of him meeting a guy named Bill Collins, who was a much more famous film presenter. I asked Collins about that. He answered me from beyond the grave, which is very strange, saying I knew the guy, I didn't know him real well. This is another horror host named Vampiro, who was on a different Vampiro, who was on Australian TV in 1973. This is a later one. This is Shane Porteous. Shane Porteous is actually a listed Australian celebrity. He did it on Brisbane for about a year. He was then replaced by this guy, John Dommett, as Professor McCarr, who did it for another 4 months. This is an Adelaide guy. He did it for about 11 years, Hedley Cullen. There could be an entire PhD just writing about him. Very interesting character. So 11 years. And finally we get to Ralph Baker, who did it for 4 years in Melbourne. Ralph actually died right at the start of my thesis, so that's not regret. So where we are, so I've been putting a lot of effort into finding all this stuff. These two things in yellow are the things that have actually happened in the 4 years since I started this thesis. Found another bit of audio, so about 3 minutes of audio of Ralph Baker introducing a film, and we crossed off Ice Block by Peters. The family finally got back to me and said, we don't think there was an actual specific Hedley Helen Deli Ernest Ice Block. We think that was actually just a bit of promotion he did for the company. So on we go. Okay, so this is my expectations. I thought this is as much potential all the various characters have. All that first pie chart fits into the little black wedge here. That's the actual chapter on Deadly Earnest. All the rest of the stuff sort of justifying it and going into the whole theory and so forth. And all the light ones on this side here are endnotes. It's literally a thesis that's just all about endnotes with a little bit of analysis on the front. Merchandise. Medal. They made me a medal. Deadly Earnest fans made me a medal for just bringing their character back to life. They're so pleased with me. Here's some recovered media. That's all that Channel 7 holds. That's a little bit of audio that I found. Here are some of the recorders people recorded it on. So to get technical, there's about 3 minutes worth of video of hundreds of hours that was produced in the first place, and there's about 15 minutes worth of audio that's been recorded off TV. So audio that's been recorded off TV is the medium when you're looking for the TV of this kind of era. It's not considered a recovery medium at all, unfortunately, in Australia, but really it's the one to go for because no one had video machines until around 1980, and so that's definitely the medium to go. The end.
Thank you, Martin.